Welcome back, everyone, to more NASCAR Heat 2 coverage here at Knee Pit Gaming. Today's video is all about Michigan. We're going to be talking about the track itself. We're going to be talking about the approach. We're going to be talking about setups, lap times, all of that type of stuff in all three series from the trucks, Xfinity, and the Cup cars. So with that in mind, let's head to the racetrack. Now that we're at the track, let's take a few moments and talk a bit about the track itself and the approach before we get into any discussion of the setup. Now, the track itself, Michigan, is very wide, very fast, a lot of banking, more banking than its sister track in Fontana, California has. So easily run, wide open in all three series. You won't have any issues as far as that goes. However, there will not be any gameplay footage at the very end of this video simply because I really wanted to run the Cup cars in the gameplay footage to show the tremendous speed that you will get here, particularly against the maximum difficulty AI. However, the AI seemed to have trouble even making a lap or two. So we can't even run a short race without them wrecking each other and being all over the place. So I got so frustrated that I nixed that idea. So there's not going to be any gameplay footage here. I got way too frustrated. I bet I tried 10 times to get gameplay footage before I finally realized it probably just wasn't going to happen. And for my own sanity, I got rid of it. So the AI tend to like to run around the very bottom, both on the straightaways and the corners here. So if you're comfortable running the high side, you will be fine, except for the ability to miss the sliding cars and the wrecking cars as they stream past you. If you do any single player races with the AI, particularly the maximum difficulty AI, you'll see very quickly what I mean. Hopefully you don't. Hopefully they run better for you than they have been for me. But just keep in mind that the high side is generally clear for you, particularly after 3 or 4 laps when they start to get spread out. But for that first few laps, it is going to be extremely hairy and difficult to survive because there are probably going to be multiple wrecks. So let's talk briefly about lap times. Lap times here, since you're wide open so easily and so often here, lap times aren't that important to me. So I didn't spend a lot of time trying to get more speed and really maximize that issue. So I'll give you a couple of notes on how I did the lap times for this particular track. Number one is I ran a traditional line. I mentioned to you that the AI liked to hug the bottom both on the straightaway and the corner. That is terribly unrealistic. Particularly to be carrying the kind of speed you're carrying, to think that you're going to make that corner. I mean, that's what an Indy car would do. So what I decided to do is 2 things on the lap times. Number one, all of these lap times are running a traditional line. And what I'm calling a traditional line is up against the wall on the straightaways, and that's including in the tri-oval or the D-shape oval rather on this particular track. So I'm up against the wall on the straights and down either at or close to the bottom in the corner. So a more traditional line that you would run for an oval rather than the restrictor plate Talladega style or IndyCar style that the AI use for this particular track. Also, the second thing is these lap times were without any help. This was not me in around 2 or 3 other cars or more and getting a drafting effect and that kind of thing. Nothing like that. All of these times were with me alone on the track. So we'll start with the trucks. The fastest laps in the trucks were around a 39.4 second lap. Xfinity cars around 38.3 seconds, and the Cup cars around a 36.8 second lap. Again, those are a traditional line. You can pick up more time if you cut off the track more and run it more like the AI do. But for me, just to keep things simple, I decided to run a more traditional line, and those are my rough lap times. Now, going to the car, you notice on the screen that we are in the Cup car, and that is simply because I'm running the same setup in all 3 series. Obviously, there is plenty of room for adjustments among the series since you'll be much slower in the trucks than you are Xfinity, and then the same thing, slower in Xfinity than you are the Cup car. So there's room for adjustment there, but I chose not to because the car or truck felt perfectly fine with the same setup across all 3, and that just made things much simpler all around. Starting with the shock settings, you can see 10s there. No reason to really change anything for me because everything felt fine in the car. Moving on to the weight settings, the left side weight at 54.2%. That's maximum left side weight because we are on an oval and only need to turn left. The front weight or nose weight is at 50.5%. And that's basically just a little bit there to keep the car stable through the corners. You're going, particularly in the Cup car, you are going extremely fast around this track. You will find straightaway speeds up around 210. And because you're not lifting, your corner speeds are going to be extremely high as well. So I needed a little bit of front weight in there just to keep the car stable. If you find that the car still is not as stable as you would like, then increase that nose weight some. See if that helps you out. On the opposite side of that, if you feel like the car isn't rotating as well as you would like, then you can reduce the front weight and see if that helps the car to rotate the way you would prefer. Wedge is at 51%, and the front and rear ride heights are at the minimum. So with the wedge, the 51% is just a number that works well for me, gives me the feel out of the car that I'm looking for. If you want the car to turn better, to rotate quicker, then decrease the wedge. On the other hand, if you feel like the car is rotating too quickly and you need more stability, then increase the wedge, and that should help you out. Moving on to the spring settings, the left front spring at 1,100 pounds, right front spring at 1,200 pounds. Particularly with the Cup car, you're running so fast and it's so easy to get the car loose in the corner at these speeds. Then, particularly with the shape of this track, with its very wide entries and narrow exit, particularly off of turn 2, then I needed that bigger right front spring just to keep things in check, keep some stability in the car. In the rear of the car, 300 pounds in the left rear, 500 pounds in the right rear, 200 pounds of rear spring split really helped to both stabilize the car and allow the car to turn from the center of the corner off in particular without getting too loose or too tight. The tire settings, these I approximated as best I could the reasonable amount of inflation, meaning that, or proper inflation, meaning that the middle temperature of the tire was roughly in between the inside and the outside. So if you want the car to rotate better, then increase the amount of split between the left and right side. And if you feel like the car is turning maybe a bit too much, then decrease the difference between the left and the right side tire pressures. For instance, if you look at the front of the car, you can see that there is 6 pounds of split between the left front and right front. If you wanted the car to rotate better, then you could try either decreasing the left front pressure or increasing the right front pressure and see how that works out for you. Now, I wouldn't recommend going to that first. If you're doing a practice session, then I would recommend changing, springs or some of the weight settings, particularly with the front weight or the wedge, before going to the tire pressure, simply because the tire pressure, I feel, is a better adjustment to use during the race. When you're coming in for a pit stop, it just helps to give you a good way of adjusting the car during that time rather than using this during a practice session. Moving on to the miscellaneous settings, left front camber is at 10 degrees maxed out. Right front camber is at -5 degrees. And it could have been more very easily. That would have helped the car to rotate better and probably carry more speed. But ultimately, it's not really what I was interested in. I wanted a little bit different feel here than out of some of the other setups I've done in the past. So I kept it at -5 degrees. Feel free to increase the amount of negative camber there if you want the car to rotate more through the center, particularly through the center and on exit. On the other hand, if you feel like the car is a little bit too loose and turning too well, one of the things you can do is come in here and reduce the amount of camber in the front tires, and that should help out. Moving on to the front sway bar, 1.15 inches is about the lowest number that I feel comfortable with. Any lower than this, and I feel like the car becomes unstable and wants to rotate too quickly and too easily. So over rotation is not something I'm particularly interested in at these speeds. So 1.15 works out well. However, as I've mentioned before, if you feel like the car is rotating too much, then increasing the front sway bar one or two clicks, and that should tighten it up. As always, there are multiple ways to achieve the same thing on a car, so I've given you at least three or four different options for attacking the same or a similar problem. So I just want you to have options. If the car is not doing something that you want it to do, then you've got options for multiple things you can change and try to help with that. I'm not using the rear sway bar, so we'll move on to the track bar. The left side track bar, 10.5 inches, right side 1 inch higher at 11.5 inches. And the 1 inch higher on the right side is just to help from the center of the corner off, just to help maintain speed. Again, since we're wide open all the way around the track, then it's not so much about getting back to the throttle, but really more about maintaining speed from the center of the corner and on exit. But if the car is a little bit too loose for your liking, particularly from the center of the corner off, then I would reduce the right side track bar first. If the car is just simply too loose for you all the way around, then one of the things you can do is reduce both the left and right side track bar. Try starting out with about an inch, maybe an inch and a half, depending on how loose it is for you, and see if that indeed helps out. The brake bias, not really used here unless you plan on using some of that in traffic. But of course, you would need to adjust this more for when you come in onto pit road under green flag pit stops. For that reason, generally in between 70 and 75%, somewhere in that range works out well for me. But again, this would only be used if you are in traffic or coming onto pit road for green flag pit stops. Grill tape, I did not mess with. The only thing you really need to worry about here is make sure you don't get much above 220 degrees for the engine. And the reason for that is if you get up around 230, then the engine will start to smoke, lose power, and ultimately your day will be done, or at the very least, you're going to have to come into the pits and remove some tape. Other than that, it really doesn't, unfortunately, do much of anything in the game as far as helping with the handling. The wheel lock is at 10 degrees as I normally keep it. Steering offset is at 0.10, again, which is more or less my default setting at nearly every track. And the reason for this is the 0.10, if you're not familiar with the steering offset, it is what allows, dictates essentially how the car goes down the straightaway. By default, these cars want to turn left hard. They're built to turn left, not go straight, because we're on an oval. So the steering offset gives you a way to try to offset some of that pull to the left on the straightaway. The higher you make the steering offset number, the more that the car will want to go straight. Just be careful about getting the number too high, because you can actually introduce a pull to the right on the straightaways, which can be very disconcerting on an oval. Moving on to the gear settings, I did not mess with first through fourth gears, as I normally don't. Instead, the rear end ratio is the one you want to pay attention to. Mine is at 3.10. That's going to get you up around 9,000 RPMs by the end of the straightaway. So again, you try to gear it at a certain RPM range. Mine is normally around 8,500. You're running so fast here, you've got room to play around with. You could lower this number down toward 3.0, or maybe even a touch lower than that if you want to dramatically lower the number of RPMs you're turning. But also there's a little bit of room, because the Cup car in particular can go above 9,000 up to around 9,500, I believe, max. I'm not saying that you necessarily want to run it that high, but you do have some room to play around with that and just see how it affects your lap times and how it affects the handling of the car. So that'll do it for our discussion. Remember, this is the same setup for all three of the series, but that's definitely not to say that there isn't some room for adjustments among the cars for the series. I simply wanted to choose the simplicity here of being able to use the same setup, and it felt great in all three. So that'll do it for Michigan. Thank you very much for joining me, and stay tuned next time for more NASCAR Heat 2.